All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling the impact of scenario planning on entrepreneurial orientation.
Catchy title. Right.
Maybe not the most exciting title, but the research itself is actually pretty fascinating.
It is.
It really gets into how using scenario planning can shape a company's personality, or like the paper calls it, their entrepreneurial orientation. You handed us this dense academic paper
Yeah.
and wanted us to unpack it, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to cut through all that academic jargon and get right to how scenario planning can actually influence how innovative and bold a company can become.
It's kind of like peeking behind the curtain to see
Yeah.
how that strategic thinking, you know, specifically this scenario planning tool can actually make that happen.
Exactly. But before we go any further, I think we should break down some of these terms.
Yeah.
What exactly do we mean when we say scenario planning? Because it's not about just predicting the future, right?
Right. No, it's not about trying to nail down one specific prediction.
Mhm.
It's more about exploring a whole bunch of those what-if scenarios,
Okay.
all of which could actually, plausibly happen.
Right.
And so thinking through those possibilities, companies can use that to make better decisions.
So it's not about crystal ball gazing. It's more about creating this mental map of all the different routes you could possibly take.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Mhm.
And then the other key term here is this entrepreneurial orientation.
Okay.
And that really just refers to a company's tendency to be innovative and proactive
Mm-hmm.
and take risks, calculated risks, of course.
Okay, so it's like their willingness to be bold, try new things,
Yeah.
shake things up a bit.
Exactly.
But I feel like any company in any industry would want that.
Right.
So why did the researchers in this paper
Yeah.
zero in on the French healthcare industry?
Well, healthcare is interesting because it's constantly facing new challenges. It's an industry that's undergoing a ton of change. And then because of that, all the regulations and barriers that are often in healthcare, it makes innovation really, really difficult.
Okay.
So healthcare is kind of the perfect place to test out something like scenario planning because you have to adapt and innovate just to keep up.
So it's almost like a paradox, right?
Yeah.
Where healthcare really needs innovation,
Yeah.
but it's also really hard to achieve innovation in that space.
It's a very unique situation, very
Yeah.
unique. So the question then becomes, can a tool like scenario planning actually help overcome some of those barriers
Yeah.
and actually enable more innovation?
Okay, so what did the research actually find?
Right.
Did it turn these French healthcare companies into fearless innovators?
Well, not exactly.
Yeah.
This is where things get really interesting. What they found was that scenario planning actually made companies more risk-taking and proactive, but not necessarily more innovative.
Hold on. So more risk-taking,
Yeah.
but not more innovative.
Right.
That seems counterintuitive. How does that even work?
Yeah. Well, it's all about preparedness. Think about it this way. If you've carefully thought through all these possible futures,
Mm-hmm.
you naturally feel more confident in your ability to make decisions,
Yeah,
even if those decisions, come with some risk.
I see.
You've already kind of played those risks out in your head.
So it's not that scenario planning makes you a daredevil.
Yeah.
It just helps you see all of the potential pitfalls or, things that could happen along the way.
And feel more prepared.
Okay.
More prepared for any outcome, really.
So maybe the fact that it didn't directly link to more innovation
Yeah.
is because it was specifically done in healthcare.
Could be.
Maybe in a different industry,
Yeah.
that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, that's something worth exploring further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's break down
Okay.
how scenario planning impacts all those different pieces of
Awesome.
entrepreneurial orientation.
Yeah, let's do that.
So we have innovativeness, proactiveness, and
Mhm.
risk-taking. Let's start with innovativeness.
Okay.
Why didn't scenario planning really move the needle much on that one?
That's the big question. It might just be that scenario planning can help with innovation in other industries,
Mm-hmm.
but healthcare is just different.
Yeah.
Those regulations and all those barriers could just be so strong that they stifle innovation.
So it's like having a powerful engine,
Right.
but being stuck in standstill traffic.
Exactly. Good analogy.
Okay, so what about proactiveness then?
Yeah.
Why does scenario planning seem to boost that aspect?
Well, when you're constantly scanning for potential futures and thinking through all these different possibilities, you're just more likely to spot opportunities early.
Okay.
And not only that, you're also more likely to seize those opportunities before anyone else does.
So it's like having a really great
Right.
set of
Yeah.
binoculars.
Yeah.
You can see further ahead than everybody else.
That's right.
And you can see things coming before your competitors.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
And then risk-taking.
Yeah.
We already kind of talked about this idea where scenario planning makes you feel more prepared.
Yeah.
So you're a little bit more comfortable taking risks.
All right.
But is there anything else about that connection that this research uncovered?
Well, here's something interesting. The research actually suggested that companies often don't start doing scenario planning specifically to become risk takers.
Okay.
It's almost like an unintentional side effect.
So they set out to be more strategic and adaptable.
Right.
And they accidentally become more risk tolerant.
Yeah, pretty much. And that actually has some really important implications for managers.
Yeah.
Because it means that the tools and processes you choose
Yeah.
might be shaping your company's culture and their risk appetite
Right.
without you even realizing it.
It's like choosing a tool is choosing a mindset.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that makes you think a little bit about unintended consequences,
Definitely.
ripple effects.
Definitely, yeah.
Speaking of which, this paper mentioned the importance of learning when it comes to scenario planning. What did they mean by that?
Well, it's a really important point. Scenario planning, it isn't just about creating a bunch of documents and checking boxes.
Okay.
It's really about the conversations and the debates and all of the shared learning that happens along the way.
So it's not just about the scenarios.
Oh, right.
It's about the process of
Yes.
getting to those scenarios.
That's right. When people from all different parts of the organization come together to talk about these potential futures, they actually start to develop this deeper understanding of the uncertainties that they're facing.
Okay.
And that shared understanding is so valuable. It's incredibly powerful.
It's like when you're trying to solve a problem and you're bouncing ideas off of somebody and then suddenly you see the solution.
That's right.
That shared perspective
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
can really help.
It can boost confidence,
Okay.
encourage people to take risks, to experiment more.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. We've talked about scenario planning, what entrepreneurial orientation is, why they chose healthcare specifically.
Right.
We've seen how it seems to link to more risk-taking and proactiveness, not so much innovativeness.
Right.
And then we just talked about these potential
Oh, yeah.
unintended consequences and this learning element.
Definitely.
But before we wrap up part one of our deep dive, I want to go back to that paradox we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Healthcare really needs more innovation,
Yes.
but it seems really resistant to it.
It's very resistant.
Where do you go from there?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I think scenario planning could actually be the way to bridge that gap.
Okay.
Even though it didn't link directly to more innovation in the study, it did show that it makes companies more comfortable with risk and more proactive. So if we can find a way to harness those strengths, to channel that confidence and energy into innovation,
Okay.
then scenario planning could be a really powerful tool for driving change in healthcare.
So it's like scenario planning could unlock that innovation that's already there.
That's right.
It's just waiting to be
unleashed.
let loose.
Exactly.
But how do we make that happen?
That is the big question.
Yeah.
And that's something we're going to explore further in part 2.
Sounds good. We'll see you there.
See you there.
Welcome back to our deep dive into scenario planning and entrepreneurial orientation.
So last time we were talking about how scenario planning can really amp up a company's willingness to take risks and be more proactive. You know, both of those are so essential for that strong entrepreneurial mindset.
Absolutely.
But the big question is, how can we actually use those things to unlock innovation? Especially in industries like healthcare, which are, let's face it, notoriously slow to change.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
We can't just assume that if we introduce scenario planning, it's going to magically lead to all these groundbreaking innovations. You know, it's more complicated than that.
It's not like, you know, sprinkle some scenario planning on it and everything's suddenly going to be brand new.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? How can we actually use scenario planning to make real change, create real innovation in healthcare?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways from the research is that it helps companies really develop a more nuanced understanding of risk.
Okay.
Instead of just taking risks all willy-nilly, they start to think about, okay, well, what are the potential consequences of this? What are the different outcomes that could happen?
So it's less about just blindly jumping into the unknown and more about like strategically approaching those risks,
Exactly. Yeah.
like turning risk from this scary monster into a puzzle you can solve.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So that's where the opportunity lies, right?
Mhm.
If we can get healthcare organizations to shift their mindset from just avoiding risk at all costs to actually managing risk, right?
That's when we'll see that real progress.
Absolutely, yeah.
But healthcare is, like we said, it's known for being risk averse, right? The stakes are high.
Yeah.
Mistakes can have huge consequences, so I imagine it's really hard to change that kind of deep-seated mindset.
It is tough.
Yeah.
But that's exactly why scenario planning is so important here.
Okay.
It allows them to, play around with different ideas,
Mhm.
test things out
Right.
in a safe environment without putting anyone in actual danger.
Yeah, so they can see how those decisions might play out
Right.
without, having those real-world consequences.
Exactly, yeah.
It's kind of like a flight simulator for
Yeah.
innovation.
I love that, yeah.
You can practice all those maneuvers without worrying about crashing the plane.
That's a great analogy.
But even if organizations do get more comfortable with risk, we can't forget about all those regulations in healthcare, right?
Right.
All those rules they have to navigate.
Oh, absolutely.
How does scenario planning help with that?
Well, it's not going to magically make all the red tape disappear,
Right.
but it can help them be more proactive
Yeah.
and working with regulators,
Okay.
working to change the rules of the game, so to speak.
So it's not just adapting to the rules, it's actually trying to shape the rules.
That's right, exactly.
Okay, I see how that could be really powerful.
Yeah.
But it all sounds a bit theoretical,
Mhm.
How do we actually make this happen? How do we convince healthcare organizations to buy into this, to actually use scenario planning effectively?
Well, I think education is a huge part of it.
Okay.
A lot of people they aren't familiar with scenario planning.
Yeah.
They don't understand the potential benefits.
Yeah.
So we need to help them see how it can help them achieve their goals, overcome some of those challenges.
So we can't just hand them the tool and say, go innovate.
Right, exactly.
We have to give them that training and support
Please.
to really use it effectively.
Yeah. And we need to tailor it to the needs of the healthcare industry specifically.
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach here.
So creating a customized version of that flight simulator we talked about,
Exactly.
one that takes into account all the specifics of healthcare, the regulations, patient privacy, all of that.
Exactly, yeah.
But even with all the right tools and all the right training, I imagine there's still going to be some pushback.
Oh, for sure.
Healthcare it doesn't always embrace change easily.
No, it's a very slow-moving industry in a lot of ways.
It is. It is.
But I am optimistic, I think, if anything, the pandemic actually showed us that the healthcare industry can move quickly when it needs to.
That's a good point.
They had to adapt.
Yeah.
They embraced telehealth. They, sped up drug development.
Right.
They had to rethink a lot of those traditional care models.
And a lot of those changes, they stuck around, right?
They did, which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So, scenario planning can help organizations build on that momentum, provide that framework for navigating all that uncertainty and making those bold decisions that are really going to shape the future of healthcare.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about shifting that mindset around risk, engaging with regulators, providing that training and support.
Mhm.
But there's one piece missing, I think, and that's collaboration.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It can't just be individual organizations doing scenario planning on their own, right?
Right.
It has to be about bringing different players to the table,
Yeah.
getting all those different perspectives working together.
Yeah. You need healthcare providers. You need insurance companies. You need tech companies, researchers,
Right, everybody working together.
patient advocacy groups, everyone.
Right, and I can see how that would lead to more holistic and innovative solutions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you're taking into account everyone's needs.
And scenario planning can be that common language that helps facilitate those conversations. It can help align their goals, identify shared risks and opportunities, and then come up with those joint strategies for the future of healthcare.
So it becomes the glue that holds all those partnerships together.
Yeah, exactly.
And helps them actually achieve that shared vision.
That's right. And that's where the magic really happens.
Yeah.
When you have all these people with different backgrounds and expertise coming together, to imagine those possibilities and create something truly new and innovative.
I like that.
But, even with all that potential, all those great things that scenario planning can do,
Yeah.
we can't forget that it can have, some unintended consequences as well.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Even the best tools can backfire if they're not used properly.
So what are some of those potential pitfalls that we should watch out for?
Well, one of the most common ones is that organizations become so focused on their scenarios
Okay.
that they start to treat them like predictions,
Right.
instead of possibilities.
Yeah, that tunnel vision problem we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So there's this really famous example, about a major oil company
Yeah.
back in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And they went through this whole big scenario planning process, but they basically dismissed the scenario that predicted a big rise in oil prices.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, you can guess what happened.
Yeah, I
A few years later, the oil crisis hit,
Right.
and they were completely caught off guard.
Yeah.
They'd gone through the motions, but they hadn't really internalized those lessons or prepared for that potential outcome.
It shows that it's not enough to just go through the motions. You have to actually act on what you learned.
Absolutely, yeah.
So creating those scenarios, that's just step one, right?
Exactly.
Then you have to have those contingency plans, be ready to pivot,
Right.
be flexible.
That's right.
So it's a constant process of learning and adapting,
Yeah, absolutely.
not just a one-time thing.
Right, exactly.
What are some other things to watch out for?
Well, another common pitfall is that scenario planning can become way too complicated, too bureaucratic, especially in bigger organizations.
So instead of being agile and helping them make decisions quickly, it becomes just this big, slow, clunky process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that.
No, it's just another layer of red tape at that point.
Right, right.
And there's actually, a story about a government agency that spent years working on this huge scenario planning project involving hundreds of experts, consultants.
Wow.
Spent a ton of money on it, but you know what? The final report was so long and complicated that it was basically useless.
Oh, wow. They kind of missed the forest for the trees there.
Yeah, they did. They really did.
So how do we avoid that?
Keep it simple.
Okay.
Keep it focused.
Yeah.
You don't have to try to predict every single possible thing that could happen,
Right.
Just focus on those key uncertainties, the things that could have the biggest impact, and then build your scenario planning around that. And make sure it's actually connected to your decision-making processes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's actually useful, not just an academic exercise.
That's right.
So we've heard some really great examples of how scenario planning can be a powerful tool for positive change, but we've also heard some cautionary tales about where it can go wrong.
Right.
What advice would you give to someone who's totally new to scenario planning? Where do they even start?
Well, first of all, I would say don't be intimidated.
Okay.
I know it can seem really complicated at first glance, but the basic ideas are actually pretty simple.
Yeah.
There are tons of resources out there that can help you get started.
Right. It's not rocket science.
No, not at all.
You don't need a PhD to figure this out.
Exactly.
So where do you start?
So start by picking a specific problem or an opportunity, that you want to explore using scenario planning.
Okay.
Then put together a small team of people who have different perspectives, who can bring different ideas to the table.
Right. That diversity of thought is so important.
Absolutely. You don't want everyone just agreeing with each other.
Right. You don't want to be in an echo chamber.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So once you've got your team, take some time to brainstorm a bunch of different scenarios that could happen,
Okay.
over the next few years. And don't be afraid to get a little creative here.
Yeah.
Think outside the box.
Yeah.
Challenge those traditional assumptions.
There's those boundaries.
Exactly. Yeah, the goal is to really stretch your thinking, And once you've come up with those scenarios, then you have to think about, well, what could the impact be? What opportunities might they create? What challenges might we face?
Right.
And most importantly, what can we do now to prepare for all those different possibilities?
So that's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about thinking about the future. It's about taking action to actually make it happen.
Exactly. Scenario planning is not just an intellectual exercise.
Right.
It's about making better decisions today to create the future that we want to see.
That's a great point. So even if you're not a CEO or, some high-level executive, you can still use scenario planning to be more proactive,
Absolutely.
more resilient, more prepared for whatever might come your way.
Anyone could benefit from it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the theory behind scenario planning.
Right.
And we've touched on a few examples,
Yeah.
but in part 3, we're going to really dive into some real-world case studies
Yes.
of how it's been used in healthcare and other industries.
Yeah, we'll look at some successes, some failures.
Yeah, and we'll share some tips on how you can actually use it in your own work.
Absolutely.
So make sure you join us for part 3 of our deep dive into scenario planning and entrepreneurial orientation.
We'll see you then.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
It's great to be back.
In the first couple of parts, we really got into the nitty-gritty of scenario planning and how it can really boost that entrepreneurial side of a company.
Yeah, how it can, help them get more comfortable with risk, be more proactive.
Right, but like we've been saying, it's not some magic bullet, right?
Right, exactly.
There are definitely some things you got to watch out for.
Absolutely.
But now, let's get out of the theoretical stuff and look at how scenario planning is actually being used in the real world to make positive changes.
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful.
To actually see it in action.
Right, to see how it works in practice.
So what are some good examples? What are companies doing out there?
Well, there are a bunch of great case studies, but one that comes to mind is this pharmaceutical company.
Okay.
They use scenario planning to prepare for disruptions in their supply chain,
Interesting.
like global supply chain disruption.
What kind of disruption?
Well, they looked at a whole range of things, from natural disasters to, political unrest,
Why?
even pandemics.
So they were thinking about pandemics before COVID.
Yeah, way before COVID, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is pretty forward thinking.
And because they did that, they were able to put contingency plans in place, make those supply chains more resilient. So when COVID did hit, they were actually in a much better position than a lot of their competitors.
They were ahead of the game.
Exactly. They were ready.
So scenario planning didn't just help them avoid problems, it actually helped them get ahead.
Right. It gave them a real competitive advantage.
Yeah, I like that.
And then there's another cool example, this one from a health tech company.
Okay, tell me about it.
So they were developing these AI-powered diagnostic tools,
Okay.
and they used scenario planning to think about the ethical implications.
That's so important, especially with AI and healthcare. There are a lot of ethical considerations.
Oh, absolutely. And they recognize that.
Yeah.
So what they did was they thought about, okay, what if our algorithms, accidentally make existing biases in healthcare worse?
Yeah, yeah.
What if they lead to, some patients getting better care than others just because of the way the algorithm is designed?
We really don't want that to happen.
No, definitely not. And they knew that. So by thinking through these ethical scenarios, they were able to build in those safeguards from the beginning.
Right, right.
So it wasn't just about the technology itself. It was about making sure that it was being used responsibly.
Yeah, I see how scenario planning can be really powerful for that kind of ethical decision making.
Yeah, it can help companies think about the bigger picture,
Yeah.
not just the bottom line.
Okay, so we've seen a couple of really great examples, but we've also talked about how scenario planning can go wrong.
Right. It's not a perfect tool.
So are there any examples of, where it didn't work out so well?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the biggest pitfalls is when organizations get too attached to their scenarios.
Okay.
Like they start to treat them like they're definitely going to happen.
Right, like a prophecy.
Yeah, exactly. And that can lead to problems.
That tunnel vision thing again.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this really famous example of this oil company in the 70s.
Okay, I think I've heard of this one.
Yeah, they did this big scenario planning thing. But they basically ignored the scenario where oil prices went way up.
Oh, no.
So, when the oil crisis happened, they were totally unprepared.
They must have regretted that.
Oh, yeah, big time.
So even if you do the scenario planning,
Right.
you have to be willing to adapt.
You have to be flexible.
And actually take action.
Exactly.
Right. You can't just create those scenarios and then file them away in a drawer somewhere.
Nope. You have to use them.
They have to inform your decisions.
Absolutely.
So what about someone who's brand new to this whole scenario planning thing? Where do they even begin?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't be intimidated by it.
Okay.
It might seem complicated, but the core ideas are pretty simple.
Yeah, you don't have to be a genius to figure it out.
Exactly. And there are lots of resources out there to help you.
Okay, so where do you start? What's step one?
Pick a specific problem or opportunity that you want to explore using scenario planning.
Okay.
Get a small group of people together who have different viewpoints.
Right. That diversity is so important.
Absolutely. You don't want everyone thinking the same way.
You want to challenge each other's ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, once you have your group, spend some time brainstorming different scenarios, the different ways things could play out.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to think big. Think creatively.
Yeah. Challenge those assumptions.
Exactly. Push those boundaries. And then, once you've come up with those scenarios, you have to think about, okay, well, what do they mean for us? What could happen? What opportunities could they create? What risks do we need to be aware of?
Right. And then how do we prepare for all of that?
Exactly. That's the key.
That's where the rubber meets the road,
Yeah, scenario planning isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's about making decisions and taking action to shape the future you want to see.
I love that.
Yeah,
So even if you're not in a leadership position, even if you're not, a CEO or something, you can still use scenario planning to be more proactive, more resilient, more prepared for whatever the future throws your way.
absolutely. It's a skill anyone can benefit from.
It is.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for walking us through all of this.
it's been my pleasure.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into scenario planning and entrepreneurial orientation.
Definitely.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the future isn't something that just happens to us.
Right.
We actually have the power to shape it
We do.
through the choices we make, the actions we take.
Exactly.
And scenario planning can be a really valuable tool to help us do that.
I think so too.
So thank you for listening to the deep dive, and we hope you'll join us again next time.
Thanks for having me.